Hey everyone, so this is something very special for me. I've never done an interview for my channel before, so I'm really honored and fortunate to have the legendary recording engineer and producer, Mr. Ron Nevison, as my guest. Ron has been in the recording business for over 50 years. He's produced multiple platinum-selling albums, and he's been recognized as one of Billboard magazine's top 5 producers on 4 separate occasions. He's worked with a veritable who's who of rock and roll legends, including The Who, Led Zeppelin, Bad Company, Jefferson Starship, Thin Lizzy, Heart, UFO, Ozzy Osbourne. The list goes on, and it's phenomenal. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ron Nevison. Ron, thanks so much for being agreeable to doing this chat with me.
Pleasure.
So just to get a little background, you're from Philly originally, is that correct?
Originally from Philly.
And is that where your love of music was fostered? Were you a musician as a young man? I think I remember reading that you were a singer.
I was. Very early on, I was in the Temple University Boys Choir and rose to a soloist as a soprano.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And by the time I was 12, I guess, my voice deepened. I didn't like wearing robes anymore, and I somehow talked myself out of it. But my mom was a piano teacher, and she had gotten a degree from the Philadelphia Conservatory of Music. And so it was a musical family. The other thing that I was interested in as a kid was electronics. It was the mid 50s, and the transistor had just come out, and I had made crystal radios. Now I was making transistor radios. I was going on my bicycle to the radio store and getting parts to make stuff. And so it doesn't surprise me that I have a career of music and electronics from early on.
Yeah, those two worlds were important to you at that age.
Exactly.
Yeah. In your early days then, as you started to work as an engineer, I've seen, a few interviews with you that were pretty comprehensive and done some reading. And it sounds like you started out on the road. You were doing sound for live acts.
I did. I got hired by a company called Festival Group, who were formed in the late 60s in Philadelphia, owned by the Spivak brothers, Electric Factory people. And they were big concert promoters in the area, and they got tired of hiring sound companies, so they formed their own.
I see.
And I got hired by them, and I toured the country, first driving trucks and humping the gear, and worked my way up to doing monitor mixing and then front of house sound. And by the time 68, 69 rolled around, during the festivals, especially the festival year, I was on tour with major artists, including Jefferson Airplane, and Traffic with Steve Winwood, and Dirk and the Dominoes, Eric Clapton, major tours.
Jim Gordon.
Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen.
Yeah, wow. That's
talking
amazing.
About drummers, Jim Gordon.
What a drum show that was. Yeah. Was it Chuck Blackwell and Keltner, right?
Yes, it was. Keltner. I know.
Well, I'm sure you've got some great tales related to just that alone.
That was Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen. They just kept piling on people on the stage. And I had a 16-channel mixer, and I had to kind of figure out who I was going to kind of showcase any particular night.
Right. Yeah.
Most of the people crowded around one or two mics for the background, so that was that. It's not like I let anybody else down, but those were interesting times. And certainly, anytime you have to mic two drummers up and percussion too, it creates a lot of issues.
So there were 2 drum sets set up, or were there actually 3 at times? Were they all 3 of those guys playing at once?
It could have been.
Yeah.
It was crazy times. I don't remember 3.
Okay.
Tell you the truth.
Maybe they were trading off on percussion or something.
Yeah, I think so.
So that was like a traveling circus, basically.
The circus part grew. It started out, and as we toured the country, because we were in one of these big old airplanes, like the old TWA Constellations.
Oh,
And, yeah. Oh, we had to push the gear up through the belly of the plane to load it.
wow.
Yeah, we didn't have people. It was primitive stuff.
So, so I know that you got burnt out on this
That was
rather.
for the joke. That was for the Joe Cocker tour.
Okay, yeah. So with the road life, did that kind of wear on you after a while, and you wanted to? Seems like you wanted to get out of that scene and into a studio.
Well, yes, and there's a great story attached to that. By the late 60s, after the summer of festivals, which I did the Atlantic City Pop Festival and Woodstock and the New Orleans
Oh
Festival and
wow,
other
yeah,
festivals, Atlanta, um, Washington, D.C. had a festival. I was on tour in the fall with Traffic, and Chris Blackwell, who's the head of Island Records, and
yeah.
also Stevie Winwood's manager at the time.
Oh,
He
okay.
managed the band and managed Traffic. And on that tour was also the opening act was I'll think of it, but another island act.
Mm-hmm.
And I was driving in a car with Chris Blackwell, just him and I in a station wagon somewhere in Ohio or who knows where it was.
Uh-huh.
We were talking, and I was telling her how it was taking a toll. I don't know how long I could keep doing this.
Right.
You know, loading the gear after a show at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, driving to Pittsburgh and a 3 hour, 4 hour drive. I'm just throwing names out there.
Oh
And
yeah.
then getting to bed at 8 and getting up at 1 in the afternoon and loading in a gig and doing
Do
the
it all
same.
over. Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't like I was flying around with my briefcase with the band like
Right.
they do now in a private plane. I
Right.
was yeah. And so he understood and he appreciated what I did. And he said, well, look, what do you want to do if you don't do this? And I said, I'd like to take my knowledge, what I've learned about mixing and microphones and all sorts of stuff. And I'd like to apply that to recording. I'd like to get into the studio.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, you can work at Island Studios. You'll have to start at the Bonham, but I have a studio in London you can work at.
Wow.
But that's how that started. So I
Yeah.
maybe in the next 3 to 6 months, I don't remember exactly, I picked up and moved to London at 15 pounds a week, which was
Wow.
like
At Basing Street,
$25 at Basing Street Studios.
and which was
Yes,
fairly new at that time, right?
it was brand new.
Yeah.
It was
Wow.
built in an old church.
Yeah.
And next to the church was an office building, part of the studios. There's two studios, a big studio in the actual church room,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a studio downstairs, a smaller studio.
Right.
Next,
Yeah.
next to that, there was an office building where they had the record company and the management company, and above the studio, Chris Blackwell had the suite, I guess, that the previous vicar had lived in or something.
Uh-huh. Right.
So yeah, it was pretty cozy.
That's great. I have a book, and I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name now, but he was an assistant. He started out as an assistant there, and then he was an assistant engineer.
Yeah,
I
that's
can't
how I
think of
started.
I can't think of his name, but I'm sure you would know him.
I
I
was
think
there. I was there a short period of time because
okay.
because I got fired.
Yeah, I read that story. You would tell that story.
Sure.
You took another gig, right?
Yeah, I was there for 6 months, I would think, or something like that. And I got a call on Friday night. Hey, Ron, can you do a session for us tomorrow? Our engineer's sick, and I knew I wasn't supposed to do an unauthorized session, but I thought, what are they going to do? Fire me?
Right.
And yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
they fired.
confidence of youth.
So yeah, exactly. So that was unfortunate. So now I find myself in London without a gig. And so to make a very long story short, I answered an ad in Melody Maker magazine for a company called Track Plan. They were making studios. And I went to interview this guy, John Alcock, who was himself a producer who, after I did an album with Thin Lizzy, he did the big album with Thin Lizzy, Boys Are Back in Town.
Okay.
He was working for this company called Track Plan. And he was intrigued by my knowledge of live sound because they wanted to branch out in making sound mixers, more comprehensive sound mixers than the 16-channel mixers that were available at the time from Shure, some of the other companies. And you have to remember, this is 1971 or something like that. So I got hired to kind of work on the studios that they were building, and found out that the owner of this company was Pete Townsend.
Right.
And Pete and Ronnie Lane from the Faces were buds. They were both into Mayor Baba. They were connected.
Oh, they had a spiritual connection. Yeah.
Spiritual connection. The fact that they both lived in Twickenham. They grew up knowing each other. Their bands, the Small Faces and the Who, were legendary bands.
Parallel kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and so Ronnie had this idea to build a mobile studio in an Airstream trailer, a caravan, they call them in England. And he bought one, just the shell of it, while he was on tour in the US, and had it shipped over. And I was given the job of building that studio. Let's call it a control room, a mobile control room.
Right.
And so I was used to the equipment that was at Basing Street Studios. The consoles were Helios, which are fabulous consoles. Studer multi-track tape machines. We were using Dolbys in those days. So I decked the Airstream out, which would be known as the LMS, which is Lane's Mobile Sound.
On the side in blue letters, right? Yeah.
I checked that out.
Yeah.
And that was my main project. I had other projects with Track Plan, but that was the main thing that I did over the couple of years that I was with them. And I was also doing sessions, engineering sessions, but my big break came because of Pete and Ronnie's friendship. You know, Pete had decided to do this album called Quadrophenia.
Right.
And based on the new guy would be called Jimmy instead of Tommy. And Jimmy would have 4 personalities, one that represented each member of the Who.
Right.
So he wasn't schizophrenic, he was quadrophrenic.
Right.
Yeah. And he had the idea to do this album in quad. Now, quad was not available. Quad was a new thing, and he had been talking with MCA, Track Records, his company's parent company in the US, about they had this system where they take remember we were talking about vinyl and cassettes in those days,
right? Right.
Where they take the 2 stereo tracks in vinyl and fold them into a encoder, and it gives you 4 speakers.
I see. So sort of a virtual quad.
Like a virtual quad, and it was a really bad system. There was a couple of different systems out in those days, and MCA was betting on this quad album from the Who to launch their system. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but that was the concept of the Quadrophenia album.
Right.
And so they had built a studio in Battersea in London.
I was just going to ask you about that. So
quad called Rampart.
Rampart. Okay, right.
Yeah, and they built it for quad because you needed quad panners on the console. You needed quad monitoring in the control room. There's, you know, you needed some
Very specific kind of layout. Yeah.
right.
And it
And
wasn't completed. Is that?
well, the console wasn't ready. So the console had a lot of the modules, a lot of them weren't, but the studio part was ready.
Mhm.
So they had to start recording their schedule wise. So Pete said, Ronnie, why don't you get LMS down and we'll use that as a control room. And in a couple of weeks, my studio, the control room here will be ready. We can start recording.
Yeah.
So that's where I really got my big break, because
Wow.
Ronnie called me up and said, get over there with the studio. And uh, who better than the guy that built it to kind of work it, right?
Perfect sense. Yeah.
So that's how I started cutting tracks with LMS at Battersea at the Rampart. And they liked the way it sounded, so they kept me on.
That's incredible. Wow. What a start. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's great.
So
So you finished that album, and if you don't mind me kind of jumping ahead now to I wanted to pull the focus into Physical Graffiti and your time spent recording that, and particularly recording Bonham, um, because there are so many great interviews with you that are pretty extended and cover the range of your career, which is just incredible and fascinating. But I wanted to zoom in, specifically to Physical Graffiti. So after Quadrophenia is done, did you get the call from someone in the Zepp camp about Physical Graffiti because of the mobile unit and Ronnie Lane and Townsend? Like, how did that all kind of come
you
together?
know, I've wondered myself. I'm not sure. I guess Ronnie Lane's, people were taking care of managing the LMS. Now there was only one other mobile in England at the time, other than like BBC trucks, and that was the Rolling Stones truck.
The big green monster truck.
The
Yeah.
the house in Headley Grange in Headley, called Headley Grange, that was used, had been used previously by Zeppelin with the Rolling Stones truck.
Right.
Now, I'm thinking that maybe the Rolling Stones truck wasn't available, and they heard about this, heard about me, heard about the fact that I had just done the Quadrophenia record, and that's how I got the gig. I'm not sure, but
Wow.
anyway,
Yeah.
we turned up at Headley Grange, ready to rock, and they weren't ready. And John Paul Jones didn't turn up. He had some issues. I never did find out. It's nothing, none of my business what happened with him. But we ended up not really rehearsing any of the Physical Graffiti stuff. We ended up just like doing Elvis songs and stuff like that.
Oh, like their sound check type stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what
And
they.
after a couple of days of that, they said, okay, we're going to reconvene.
Oh,
So
yeah. So, well, the first thing is, did Peter Grant contact you? Do you remember? Was it him or Jimmy? Like, did Jimmy get on the phone and say, "Hi, Ronnie suggested I reach out to you"? Okay,
I'm sure Grant's office contacted Ronnie Lane's office.
that's how that would have gone
I,
down.
I, I
Okay,
would, I
yeah,
would. We didn't have cell phones in those days.
right, right,
It
yeah.
wasn't.
You had the Bakelite. You had the Bakelite phones on the table. Yeah,
It is a little specific because um, I only had 6 weeks of time before I was booked again to start the Tommy film with The Who,
right. Yeah,
which was a whole year's work. And I had
yeah.
just Quadrophenia album, and as nice it was, and as pleased as I was to work on a album that would become legendary, like Physical Graffiti. I was just a hired hand in those days. I was just the engineer.
Hmm.
And you have to understand that Led Zeppelin uh, didn't take their engineers with them. They used the engineers at the studios.
Right.
I wouldn't have gone from Headley Grange into Olympic Studios because they used Keith Harwood to do that.
Right.
And they would maybe go to New York and have Eddie Kramer mix it, and I wouldn't be doing that.
Hmm.
With the Quadrophenia album, Pete had me engineering the album, mixing the album, doing sound effects. I was much more of a complete job.
Right.
So it's all factored into my thinking. Now, when John Paul Jones decided to not get involved for a while, that threw my timeline way off.
I
And
see.
so, but what the good thing happened was that Peter Grant had been just kind of got this band called the Paul Rogers Band together, which would become Bad Company. It didn't have a name at the time.
Yeah.
And Peter Grant said, "Why don't you take these guys out there and record?" So we went out to Headley Grange, and in 10 days, we recorded what's now known as the Badco album.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that the entry hall at Headley Grange was appropriate for Simon Kirke's drums. So I used the dining room for his drums, which was a bright room, but it was smaller.
Okay.
And when that was finished, that's when in my recollection, we went back to Headley Grange to cut I think it was 8 songs or 9 songs that I cut,
Yeah.
not even knowing that the album was going to be 15 songs. I didn't
Yeah,
even
that there
know
was all that previously recorded material.
right from Houses of the Holy or wherever it was from. Yeah.
Yeah. It would have been a
That's
single album basically if they hadn't pulled all that stuff in.
right.
Or maybe. But so I I recall there being some tracks, you know how like these special edition CD sets they put out the alternate takes when they
Right.
did the re-releases, the deluxe editions, and there's like a, a studio rehearsal or alternate of Sick Again. There's some there's the original drum and maybe guitar, but with different vocals, you know, for different takes and stuff like that. But I remember hearing that Sick Again because it's a distinctly different take. And there's another one of Wanton as well. And I thought, oh my God, this is like full on room sound. It just sounds like you're hearing them playing in the room together. There's no isolation or separation. So I have a bunch of pointed questions now that I wanted to
Yeah.
sort of
Okay.
rattle off, and you can just give me the quick answers as they pop into your head. So I'm curious first of all about how they approached recording. Like, did they come in with most of the stuff fleshed out, or were they spending a lot of time, which wouldn't be so efficient, working stuff through in the studio before recording it?
I would say that it was worked. It was pretty thorough. Were pretty thoroughly rehearsed coming in.
Okay. And then when they started tracking, I know, you know, legend has it Bonzo's drums are set up in the foyer in the entryway of the house. Do you remember what drum kit he was using, or if he used more than one or different drums?
No, he just had one drum kit for the songs that we did. I think it was a big old Ludwig kit, but I can't be
Yeah.
sure.
Do you remember if it was a green sparkle kit or if it was the Vista, like the acrylic orange that looks like fire? Do you remember if it was an acrylic kit?
I don't remember. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. That's one of those things that as a Bonham nerd, you know,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of speculation like, oh, you know, you hear people say, oh, he only used his green sparkles after a certain point in the studio. It was his favorite kit. He never used the acrylic. He never used the steel. But then some years ago, some photos surfaced from Polar Studios when they were recording in Through the Outdoor. And you can clearly see his stainless steel kit set up.
I wish I'd
So
had my iPhone in those days. I would have taken a
yeah,
ton of pictures.
that's another question actually I have is
I don't have any photos from those sessions, unfortunately.
right. And I wondered that because it seemed to me like they ran a tight ship. And I
And
just assumed that Peter Grant and Jimmy probably didn't want to have a whole lot of photos or
I
camera,
don't,
you
I
know.
don't think they would have minded that if I had
Oh,
taken some.
really?
Yeah, I can't be sure, but I
Okay.
never pulled out a camera to test it out.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
was
You were busy with other stuff.
I was busy, yes. But
So,
yeah.
yeah. So did they routinely comment about the sounds like in playback? They would go out to the Airstream and listen a little bit. Did all of them do that, or was it primarily just Jimmy since he's the
No, no,
producer?
no. It was Jimmy would rush into the Airstream and pull his guitar down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, on some occasions,
Uh-huh.
Uh, but he also just wanted to hear how solid the drum track was in terms of because he knew he'd be replacing his guitar. And
Yeah.
so when we recorded some songs, Jonesy would be on clavinet instead of bass.
Hmm.
Dun, 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 he would
Trampled underfoot and
like, yeah,
also
and
what is
well,
it
songs like
in
In the Light,
in the light? Yeah, right, right,
he and then we put the bass on after. So just to get the track, he'd play a keyboard.
and
But
were they always pretty much playing together? At least the three instrumentalists.
oh yeah, everybody was in different rooms. So
So when they laid down something like
oh,
Custard Pie, he's on clavinet.
I had him in different places in the house.
Okay, yeah,
Um, for separation so the vocal so the drums wouldn't leak into I don't remember exactly because I was used Headley Grange for a bad company. I can't remember where just remember where I put the drums, but uh, you know, walking around when he was playing, you had the sense that he mixed himself.
oh yeah,
You could almost put the microphones anywhere because the mix, a lot of other drummers, you would need help with the kick drum. He
right,
didn't need any help with that. And so he would not let me put any close mics near the kit. I had them ready to go.
mm-hmm,
I said, well, I'll just, and also, I only had a 16 track machine,
right,
right?
right,
So I didn't have a lot of options for a lot of. I was kind of happy just to put two mics out because that's what he wanted.
right, right, right.
I used two U87 FETs
Mm-hmm.
for his drums. That's it.
And were those dangled up in the stairwell, or were they a little bit closer to the kit?
Or I would say they're on the landing of the first level. The Headley Grange had like a rectangular as you walked up three flights. So
Yeah.
on the flight of the first floor, I had them poking out through the railing. And I remember we had to kind of walk over the poles to get up to our bedrooms. I had to be careful with that.
Oh, yeah.
But
That's just a
I
trip
would
on.
I would say that they were maybe I would think that the ground floor in England is the ground floor, first floor, second floor. The ground floor ceiling was probably, 9 or 10 feet. So that they were about 9 or 10 feet off the ground, maybe higher,
Okay.
and
Okay.
about maybe 20 feet away from the drums.
Yeah. Wow. So that incredible sense of space that
That's
gets created.
set like a stereo pair,
Yeah.
just not wide, set like that.
Did you ever talk to Andy Johns about the way he did it, or did you guys ever have any communication later? Like, oh yeah, I had him up on the stairwell and I did this and I used it because he supposedly used two Beyer dynamic M160s,
Mhm, mhm.
is what I've heard him say in an interview. So
Doesn't surprise me.
yeah.
Andy and I and Eddie Kramer did a kind of a seminar for Shure microphones in I think 2009 in Chicago about Led Zeppelin. It was organized by the producers and engineers wing of the Grammy people, the
Oh.
Recording Academy,
Mhm.
and yeah, that was fun. That was
I live
pretty.
about I live about 2 miles from the Shure headquarters.
Oh, right,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm in Chicago.
beautiful building. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Mies van der Rohe building. Well, it was. They moved. They've since
Ah,
moved. But you're
ah,
probably remembering the glass. that big glass modern building that's kind of like a wedge.
I don't remember the building so much. I remember the big hall that we were in. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful.
Well, that's
But I don't,
fascinating.
everybody talked about their, the thing that was interesting, I remember, was that everybody had the same conclusion that, Bonham played the riff.
Absolutely.
That's what he did. And
Yeah.
that's why
That's why his,
he didn't play time to the riff. He played the riff.
I've
And
actually, yeah,
that's the difference in Led Zeppelin. I think that having been there at ground level, that was my take leaving
absolutely.
the sessions.
Yeah, I actually did a video. Well, I've done a series of videos analyzing his drumming on every record. And I always, try to stress that it's so important to remember that he played to the riff or the melody or the bass line or the guitar line so much more so than many other drummers, especially of the era, which gives it a whole other dimension of compositionality, and funk, because so much of that music is funky. I mean, when you think about like Custard Pie, the line is da 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 da, and Bonzo was playing. He could have played a straight rock beat through it.
Well, no,
So,
that's it.
you know,
That's he played
anybody would have done that, but he plays the riff, and by
because
playing the riff, it
he
adds a
could.
whole other thing. Yeah, he
He could.
plays the lick. Yeah.
He played
So
because he could. It was complicated stuff, but you know, he could do that.
yeah, he had a very musical ear as a drummer that way. So his contributions are massive because of that. He's not just a drummer. And then that's one of the things, I guess, in thinking about the way you set up the mics, and you said you had sort of expected to put close mics in place, and he said, just give
Well,
me a couple overheads.
I didn't have a lot of years under my belt as an engineer at this point.
Hmm.
And they had been there before. And
Yeah,
like you said with Andy John, so they knew kind of what to expect and what they wanted.
right.
And they were very happy with the way I did it.
Did
And
Bonzo come into the Airstream much and listen to
yeah,
himself?
yeah, yeah, he did.
What was his demeanor like? I'm just curious. Was he like excited, bummed out? Like, was it different range of emotions that musicians go
Yeah,
through when they hear themselves?
the range of emotions changed when Charlie came at night.
The marching powder.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember reading an maybe I
Yes.
saw an interview with you.
I was wondering who Charlie was, and then after a few days, I realized who Charlie was. But yeah, at some point, I had to, I talked to Peter Grant. I said, look, they're waking me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're not getting work done. And he said, well, maybe you should not stay there, lock up the Airstream, and drive home. So that's what I started doing.
Flip the
Driving
close
back.
sign.
Yeah, exactly. Locking up there. And they knew it. They knew, you know.
Yeah. So did they? So they kind of modified the behavior a little bit after that point, or
Oh no, I wasn't there after.
oh, so you didn't know? Yeah.
I don't know if they did or not. I just didn't stay there. When we finished recording, instead of hanging out the whole night and then going to sleep and then waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. Hey, Ronnie, let's go down and record.
Oh, oh dear.
Yeah.
Yeah, that gets
So
old, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. So only that happened a couple of times, and I went, I think it's better if somebody's controlling this, So
Yeah. Now, did family ever come by? I'm assuming not.
nobody came by.
No guests, no like Ronnie Lane didn't show up, or Ron
No
Harper.
guests,
I
no
mean, Roy
women,
Harper.
no girlfriends, no nothing.
Wow. So
Just really,
that's what I've
just
always, yeah. Yeah, that's what I've always heard, that Peter Grant and Jimmy just ran a real tight ship. And that's why I
well,
wondered,
Richard was there. He was the go-between.
was Bonzo's tech there? Was Mick Hinton around?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. But Richard, the road manager, what's his last name?
Richard Cole.
Richard Cole. He was
Yeah.
the main guy. He was the main guy.
Oh, yeah.
He would be, Grant would come out there, once or twice, but Richard Cole was the guy that was the liaison between the management and yeah, he was their main.
Absolutely, absolutely understood. Yeah. As far as the new material that they were working on, um, do you recall Jimmy working on Swan Song? Are you
Yes,
You do? Okay.
it was
Uh,
two parts, Swan Song 1 and Swan Song 2.
yeah, and I've always been, most Zepp fans are
Never was.
fascinated by this legendary song that never came to fruition. Um, was there a lot of time spent on that, or was that sort of like in the process in between when they were working on takes for the album?
That was part of. That's the backing track to that.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, part two. Let me see what part two is. I don't remember why it was in two parts. We cut tracks. We cut tracks on that, but I never went anything. I never did any overdubs on that, so I don't know what happened with
Yeah,
the.
and as you said, you had to leave the project, and it seemed like that was much more of an epic undertaking. That song, it was going to have multiple sections, and so another thing I wanted to ask you about is they on this album there are a couple songs that actually share, they share similarities in that there's like In the Light is somewhat of an epic, and the course compositionally that it runs, and same with Kashmir.
Mhm.
Um, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about Kashmir, any specific recollections of hearing that either the first time, or were they running through it and then they said, okay, we're going to try a take on this, and that was it, or did they spend a lot of time tracking that?
They were so well rehearsed. They, you know, the only thing that I remember on some of these songs was the lyrics weren't quite finished. He obviously is sometimes mumbling through a song. I mean, he had them mostly finished, but not entirely finished. I
Okay.
didn't I didn't do any of the final vocals, so I wasn't party to that. But as far as Kashmir goes, I do remember um, getting an Eventide phaser the very day that we cut the drum tracks on that.
Oh, wow.
They told me that it sounded good on cymbals.
Hmm.
So to test that theory out, now if you think about it, I only had left and right drums. I didn't have traditionally you'd have drum overheads. So I couldn't just put like one of the drum overheads through the phaser. So what I did, I took the right drum track
Hmm.
through the phaser and recorded it on a third track.
Okay.
Okay. And that's what you hear.
So you folded that into
I
the
just I just put it in, yeah, I just
wow.
added it to. And when they came in for a playback, they loved it. And of course, I didn't think anything else of it because I didn't mix it, but it became part of the track.
So obviously that was the track that was used for the final album then. I mean, for
Well,
the
that
final
was it.
take. That was
Yeah, I
it.
mean that was, yeah, that was
Yeah.
it.
Wow. Um, did you ever have a bass drum mic out front or just the overheads? Wow.
It's the room mics.
Yeah.
They were kind of overheads, but
But that's true. Yeah, they're more like room mics. Yeah.
I said he mixed himself. So yeah, it was just a stereo pair. It was stereo drums.
Right. Right. So the way they would do it is they would record the song together, like you said. So if Jones is, whether he's playing bass or he's playing keys like a clavinet, he's doing his thing. Bonzo's playing with him. Jimmy's playing what's likely to be a scratch guitar track, and then
Yeah,
Jimmy
now
would go in later.
say for sure what was kept and what wasn't kept.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, the guitar, he might have kept a lot of the guitars,
sometimes, right.
the keyboards and the bass, and the drums for sure were kept.
Yeah,
I remember uh, the vocals that we started. I remember when we started working. Remember I told you we started working like doing Elvis songs.
yeah,
Robert Plant loved the way my vocals sound. He loved what I was doing to the vocals. And so I had a good rapport with him. It's a shame I didn't get to do more than live stuff, but
yeah,
sometimes that's the way things work out.
yeah.
But so I'm not sure what happened after it went away from Headley Grange. What they added, and of course we know about the original Kashmir was called "Driving to Kashmir."
Right.
That's
Yeah.
the original title of the song. And I think that Plant had been to Kashmir the summer before, and that was what his because on all the boxes that I have, it says "Driving to Kashmir."
Yeah, it says Ronnie Lane's mobile studio, October 25th, 1973.
Oh, okay, all right.
And then it says Olympic Studio Rough Orchestra Mix, Keith Harwood, blah, blah, blah. And that's much later. That's in the fall of 74. So that's the post-production stuff. I know it
So
took them a while to get that
guess
orchestra together.
73. I guess it was the end of 73.
Yeah, yeah. So I know that the song was written, Robert Plant was taking a holiday in Morocco. And
Mm.
on the road trip across the desert, you see the Atlas Mountains in the distance, and he was inspired with
Yeah,
for this lyric, never having been to Kashmir. So it
right.
was all just
Right.
sort of like a visualization of what it must be like in Kashmir.
I wasn't clear on that, if he had actually been there or if he was
Yeah,
inspired.
yeah, yeah. So as far as like, Bonzo's setup, I know you said you can't recall which drums he used. Do you recall if there was any muffling involved? You know how like when you walk around the kit and you see what a drummer's got going on, like, they lay a
Honestly,
pillow on the bed. I know that he never did that, but I'm just curious to know.
I can't remember.
Okay.
People asked me what kind of guitar Jimmy used. I couldn't remember that. I just
Yeah.
don't just it just it's only 50 years ago,
I know, and
So
certain things stand out. Like I thought it was hilarious when you talked about Keith Moon in that interview with the drum guys, and you said you had to duct tape the headphones around his head because he moved around so much.
well, yeah, because he was actually one of the first guys that had ever played to a click, because Pete Townsend had done so much synthesizer work at his studio.
Oh yeah, so he had to
Because
have it on some sort of a beat reference for him.
in those days, the ARP synth that he used, I'm trying to think of the number of it, the 2501 or 2601 or something like that,
Hmm.
was modular. It had these big modular things and you plugged everything in. You couldn't save a sound, and they would go constantly out of tune. So it's not like you could, once you got a string sound, you had to record it
Yeah, you got to
and
hurry up.
tear it all down and put another sound up. So
Right.
what he did was he had a studio about the size of your room there where you are, from what I can see,
It's a
and
small
he,
room.
yeah, he would. Yeah, he had a small room too, and he would do the synthesized work with a little 10-channel Neve console,
Yeah. Hmm.
10-channel, two out, and a 3M 24 track or 16 track. I guess it was a 16 track.
Okay.
And he would put a click track down and he would do all the keyboards, and he'd put rudimentary drums and bass down, nothing that would embarrass Keith Moon or John Entwistle. And then we take it in the studio and we redo everything else.
I see. Yeah.
And so it was the only way to do it. Instead of him getting a sound together in the back of the studio and said, okay, let's go record quickly. So Keith, being Keith, headphones would fly off, and
Yeah.
so we had to tape them on.
I think
But
there's some
I
footage. There's some footage of them recording a tune, and he's got the tape around the headphones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the way to do it. Just like an athlete will tape his shoes on,
Right.
right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, hey,
But I had trouble finding places for the microphones. I couldn't. He had so many drums. He had two hi-hats. He had,
oh yeah,
everything was
a lot
everything
of
was.
toms. Yeah.
How do I get to the snare?
You mean placement?
Placement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Weren't clip-ons back then either, really. I'm
we
sure.
did something I don't remember, but
Yeah. Um, did Bonzo? So I'm assuming he had to be wearing headphones in the studio because the other guys are in different rooms.
oh yeah, everybody wore headphones. Sure.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. Boy, I wish there were some photos of the sessions.
Yeah, me
That's
too.
one of those things as a Bonham maniac, or just in general, your favorite bands. Like with the recent release of Get Back and seeing the Beatles working with Glyn Johns in the studio. Um,
That was fantastic.
I mean, even if there was just like a
Yeah,
one
I agree.
shot of Bonzo's drum, like I know Eddie Kramer took some photos from the Stargrove sessions for Houses of the Holy.
Right.
And it's funny because there's a sequence of photos and John is like, this, and then there's another one. And then there's one where he's just like, he's like glaring at him right into the camera, and it's almost a photo like, don't take this goddamn picture, mate. And you only see the top of John's tom-tom and a mic on the tom. So he must be close mic'd for that particular session, because
Oh,
you
I
see the
think.
mic. But
Well, I
nothing
worked.
of the full kit. There's no images of the full kit in the studio other than some from the second album.
Well, I worked at Stargroves too with LMS.
Hmm.
I think it was I was there a couple of times. One, we did some demos for Ronnie Lane,
Hmm.
and I remember Rod Stewart was there doing some stuff with us. Um, and there was a time I was there with Keith Moon, so I must have done some demos or something with the Who, because I
Wow.
remember Keith being at Stargroves, because there's a little pub right at the end of the driveway,
Hmm.
because Stargroves, the house, it was Mick Jagger's house, and uh, it was his country house. And there was a pub like at the end, right down, you'd walk down to the end, and Keith and I would go in there, have a beer, and play some bar billiards.
Yeah.
So, so I'm not sure, quite can't remember why he would have been there unless I was there recording him.
Yeah. Okay. So whatever happened to the actual Airstream? Does it exist today? Is it in use?
Yeah, I think it
Um,
is. I think it is. I remember um, after I stopped working for Ronnie Lane, at some point I had worked on a studio for Ronnie Wood at his house in Richmond, and the Rolling Stones were kind of asking Woody to join. The
hmm.
Faces were on the verge of breaking up.
Hmm.
I had been in the studio producing an album, supposedly the last album for the Faces, the Rod Stewart version of the Faces,
Right.
at Air Studios. And we got about 2 weeks into the project, and it got canned. No one was giving up their songs.
Oh, wow.
Woody was saving his songs for the Stones. Uh, you know, um, yeah, it just
And was Kenny Jones there? Was Kenny
Rod.
Jones
Yeah.
part of that?
Oh, yeah.
So he was
Rod.
just sort of in the middle of it all.
Rod was thinking about, Rod had a big hit with Maggie May, which kind of broke up the band, because Maggie May was on his solo record. It wasn't on Warner Brothers, The Faces. And so he became a solo artist at that point.
Yeah.
And so everybody was going in, different directions. And so I I was sitting doing a session at this studio at the Wick, which is Ronnie Wood's studio. And in walks in the two guys that own the record plant, Gary Kilgren and Chris Stone. Ronnie had invited them over because they had been recording, the record plant mobile studio had been recording their tour in here in the States.
Okay.
And so I started a relationship with those guys, and they offered me a job to be the chief engineer at the record plant in LA, which I took. That was probably 1975.
I see.
So that was the 4 or 5 years I spent in London. That was the end of that. And by going and working in LA, I gave up my, some of my relationships with like Pete Townsend, etc.
The UK guys, yeah.
The UK guys. I kind of started a new.
That was a new chapter
of my life. Yeah.
I see. So, did you never work with the RMS again?
No.
With the mobile
LMS.
LMS. RMS.
Yeah.
That's something else.
But it's you can Google it. It's still around. I remember after I stopped working for Ronnie, somebody broken into it.
Oh.
And he asked me if I knew anything about it, and I said no. And it sounded a little accusatorial, or is that what he said? He sounded like, anyway, I didn't like the conversation. He was pissed off that somebody had broken into it, but it was out of my hands. It wasn't, I was very careful where I parked it, and,
Yeah.
there was no alarms in those days, but under my kind of, overview, it was always safe. So
Yeah.
I don't know what.
You never had any issues like that with it before, so.
No, didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Did you happen, this thought just crossed my mind. Did you ever know a guy named Pete Buckland?
Oh, yeah.
You know Pete?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Pete, yeah, sure. Pete was a roadie for the Faces.
For the Faces, yeah.
I think he was Woody's, not Woody's roadie. He was maybe the road manager, or.
He was the road manager. At least he told me he was the road manager. He was the road manager when I was working with vocalist Diana Krall. You familiar with her?
I've heard of her.
She's from Canada. She's married to Elvis Costello now, but at that time she's a big jazz vocalist star. And she was on tour touring her record, "The Look of Love," which won, the Juno Awards and this and that. And anyway, Pete was such a nice guy, and we got along really well. And he told me a lot of these stories about the Faces, and about Entwistle, and they were friends. And actually, John Entwistle passed away while we were on tour. They were rehearsing for their upcoming tour. I think it was in Vegas, and we were somewhere in Asia, and he was really down because that had just happened. But yeah, I thought you must have known him then, because you were right there at that time.
I knew Pete, even though I didn't really, I never really. I only worked with the Faces for that couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But because I worked for Pete's company, Track Plan, I was always doing stuff for the Faces. I was always doing little projects for Ronnie Lane individually. I built Ronnie Lane. I took 2 cassette players and a little mixer, and I built him this thing that he could multi-track, going from one cassette player through to the other cassette player.
Oh, yeah.
Multi-track, going back and forth. And so he could do demos like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a house in Ibiza, a vacation house, no electricity, no bathrooms, no nothing. And he invited me. I went down there with a Range Rover, or actually it was a Land Rover, with a electrical system. I guess it had a generator, and we did some demos down there. Took some gear down and recorded through these cassette players. Right? It was wild.
Wow, what a trip.
On the microphone in the cistern, put a speaker down there to get some reverb. It was a very cool trip.
That's really amazing.
A week, 10 days down there. Yeah, so I was doing a lot of stuff with those guys. Like I said, we're a building studio for Ronnie Wood as well as Ronnie Lane. So, but the only chance I had to do an album with them, they nixed because of the politics of the band.
Yeah, it didn't get very
That's
far.
unfortunate. Yeah.
That's too bad. That is too bad. So just to kind of circle back to Zeppelin, I
Yeah.
appreciate you spending all this time talking with me about this. Um, I guess in conclusion, then regarding physical graffiti, you were in the midst of recording when you realized I'm not going to be able to go much longer here, guys, because I've got a contract with the Who to do. It was Tommy, right? The soundtrack.
Right.
So, what was their reaction like to that? I mean, did you have to give them? Did you give them notice basically and just say I don't have any more time, or how did that end basically?
Poorly.
Oh, okay. I would assume so. They weren't too pleased, huh?
If you're going to post this, I can't really say the words that they used, but they weren't happy. But like I said before, they were the ones that. Now, look, I'm probably the only person ever quit Led Zeppelin, right? But they booked me for a period of time, and I had another. I was a young engineer,
Right.
and I had this other thing. If they had started with somebody else, I could have lost that gig. It was a whole year gig. The Tommy film, we recorded the whole film, and then we went out on and filmed it, and then came back in and re-recorded stuff, added stuff,
It's a
edited
major,
stuff.
major
Yeah,
project. Yeah.
major project, and so as much as I loved working on it, just didn't work out for me, and they weren't that understanding of how I could just leave it.
I
And
see.
so yeah, that wasn't, but that's the way it goes.
That's life. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what an incredible experience to have, though, creating the sounds, documenting the sounds of one of the most iconic rock records. And and your resume is just phenomenal. I mean, I highly encourage anyone watching this to go on YouTube, look up Ron Nevison, and check out some of the other interviews that he's done that are very comprehensive about his career. Lots of other really great stories to hear. And I did you ever finish your book? I ask that way because
Uh,
I'm sorry if you did and it's published and I don't have it.
no, COVID delayed the book, and
Okay.
then I guess what happened really is that when COVID uh, put everybody at home, everybody started writing books.
Yeah.
They also started writing music too,
And they
which is
started baking bread. Yeah.
and doing stuff, and all of a sudden, the little literary world was inundated. And
Uh,
so I have to get back to it. The book is maybe a third finished, and I have to get back to it. It's the book is from the early days of my live sound mixing up to 99, where I did a Leonard Skinner record, and I haven't filled in anything after that, and I haven't filled in a lot of personal things that I wanted to add. That's just really a
so
career
it's okay. So it's still a work in progress. And
progress. Yeah.
well, yeah, I look forward to reading it when it's done because you've had such a fascinating, incredible career. And yeah, that'll be great. Great to read about. So once again, Ron, thank you so much for doing this interview with me. Really appreciate your time. And I hope you all out there who watch this enjoy it and look up Ron Nevison. You have a website, right?
Yeah,
RonNevison.com.
I
Yeah,
do. Yeah. Mhm.
great. Okay. Well, thanks
There's
very much, man.
a
Really
contact
appreciate it.
on the website.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron.
Bye.
All right.